This Zero Trust In-Depth special is sponsored by Booz Allen. Welcome to the latest program in the In-Depth series from FedGov Today. On this program, we'll look at Zero Trust In-Depth. I'm the host of FedGov Today, Francis Rose. The Department of Defense is moving toward a 2027 deadline to fully operationalize its Zero Trust strategy. That strategy lists the National Institute of Standards and Technology's publication 800-207 as the foundation and defining document for what Zero Trust is and how it works. The civilian agencies are all in on Zero Trust 2 as the defining construct for their cybersecurity postures. On this program, you'll go in depth with movers from government and industry that are driving Zero Trust results. Leaders from the Defense Information Systems Agency, the State Department, the Government Accountability Office, and Booz Allen are here to discuss what they're doing on Zero Trust now, what it means, and what's ahead for Zero Trust and for government-industry collaboration. We begin with Ryan Zacka, Solution Architect at Booz Allen. Ryan, welcome. Thanks for joining me. What's your sense of what agencies are doing now and where they are in their Zero Trust journeys?
Certainly. Both sides, both DoD and civilian federal agencies, have been working on their implementation plans, as is guided by CISA as well as DoD CIO. Where they're currently at is a depends answer. Some have greater levels of maturity based on where they are today and where they will be in the future based on burn down of that implementation plan as they are putting together. A lot of them have been working for a very long time. As many people know, Zero Trust isn't necessarily brand new. It takes a lot of the fundamentals that we have from cybersecurity and is refocusing those to help build internal castle walls instead of external ones. So a lot of them have an understanding of what devices they have on the network. They're now just building greater control of those devices and the data within.
A lot of agencies do take pride in saying, we've already started on Zero Trust before it was called Zero Trust, that kind of thing. What are some of the best practices or some of the commonalities that you've seen among what the organizations are doing to respond to the Zero Trust mandate?
Certainly. So a big part of that is what I alluded to just a minute ago. Inventory. Where is our data? What are our devices? How can we secure them? How do they need to interact with each other? Because that is ultimately what creates the ability for an organization to build their control, right? How do we manage those devices, the data, the users within that space? There's a lot of commonality associated with the tool sets that the organizations can share. We have similar implementations in that space. A lot of us are shifting to the cloud, so we can take a lot of lessons learned out of cloud infrastructure that also implements Zero Trust principles and capabilities there, and to be able to share that. That's why there's a lot of integration between CISA and DoD CIO, because even though they have fundamentally, or not fundamentally, but different implementation plans and guidance, they're essentially the same. They're very similar to each other despite having slightly different pillars to be able to share that information between the different organizations.
One of the other things that agency people say all the time is there's no Zero Trust tool. We're not trying to buy Zero Trust as a thing. How does that inform the way that organizations should think about successfully implementing the strategies that you talked about a moment ago?
Certainly. And as other people have heard, right, it's a mind shift. It's a paradigm. It's not only about just buying a tool. And that's a big part of that, right? A lot of that goes with understanding the culture of the organization you are in and how people are sharing data. A good example of that is, say, the IC community, intelligence community, right? Over the years, culturally, they build up small barriers. They're used to building castle walls inside of the external, being able to share that within a special access program environment. For our civilian federal agencies and some of our DoD agencies, that is new to them, right? They're used to being able to share data ubiquitously in the organization. That's that culture shift that they need to understand and say, what are the changes that I need to make to policy so that I can control data effectively, and then understand how do I make sure that as people are sharing data within, they're always questioning themselves or building technical controls in some cases to question for them. should that data be going to that individual at this time, or should I be controlling access to that and tracking access in the other aspect? Because it's not only just sharing it, it's also keeping track of who used it, where it is moving, so that when we do have breaches, again, one of those wonderful zero trust terms of assume breach, we are able to then track down where that data went and who had access to it at that particular time.
Final thought for this part of the program, Ryan, what's over the horizon as people get beyond the inventory phase that you talked about a few moments ago? What should they be thinking about today to prepare for the next steps in implementation and deployment?
So a big part of that is what is the innovative side, I guess you could say, from zero trust, right? That's where AI and ML come in, where your secure access service edge for secure control of anyone, wherever they are in the world. We have remote work, we're still coming back to the office, but we still have to control our data, our users, our systems in a similar way in each case. That's where the secure access service edge and fundamental functionality there, right? Being able to check, I have a device, it is patched to the level it's intended to be within my policy. I know who the user who is sitting on that device is, and now I need to know what data do we need to then provide them access to. If they're sitting on the VPN or sitting within the office, I have to manage that appropriately. AI comes into place along with that as well. All of that control environment generates a wealth of data, right? And a lot of times we've been dealing it for years. What do I do with that data? How do I understand what are the key points that I need out of that? That's where AI can come in to help triage all of that data, mine through it, find that needle in the haystack that are the indicators of compromise or indicators of malicious activity that we need to bubble up. So as organizations understand what their current is, meaning inventory, those are the major next steps to then start getting towards the control side. Controlling everybody's access within the environment with SASE and other solutions like that, and then AI trafficking and or watching all of that traffic and understand what's going on in the environment.
All right, you stay here. We're going to continue the conversation in just a moment. We'll take a quick break, and then you'll meet leaders from DISA, the State Department, and GAO when Zero Trust In Depth continues in a moment. Welcome back to Zero Trust In Depth. Ryan Zacka told you about some of the best practices for Zero Trust implementation in the first part of this program. Agencies across government are each at different stages of their Zero Trust journeys, as you heard. Joining Ryan and me to talk about those journeys, Chris Pym, Zero Trust Portfolio Manager at the Defense Information Systems Agency, Manuel Medrano, Director of the Office of Cyber Monitoring and Operations at the State Department, and Mark Cantor, the Chief Information Security Officer at the Government Accountability Office. Welcome to all of you gentlemen. Thanks for joining me. Chris, I start with you. What's DISA's role and what's your role personally in helping DoD roll out their Zero Trust strategy over the next couple of years?
So DISA has several roles. The first role is to make sure that DISA's terrain is covered from a networking standpoint for all of the locations that DISA has. So that's one area we've been working. The second area is, as we expand that to defense agencies and field activities, each one of those that join the network that is DoDNet is going to have Zero Trust accounted for as well through DISA. And then lastly, DISA traditionally is a hosting environment, or has been a hosting environment, be it cloud or on-premise. So we have Zero Trust roles to discuss there as well, and we have solutions in that space. And then, of course, as we move into tactical, ships, boats, cutters, those type of things, we are doing some test cases in that space as well. So really, all of those things together, in my mind, the network, the endpoint, and then the hosting, are all parts of the things that DISA have to do for the combatant commands, the DAFAs, and then DISA itself.
What is your role in helping them track the timeline that John Sherman set when he was the CIO to get to full Zero Trust implementation by 2027?
So for DISA and the DAFAs, it's 100% outsourced to DISA for the terrain that we're covering for them. The combatant commands is more voluntary at this point. We're working with 3 right now. And then we would be responsible for their timeline to get there by FY27. So as we partner with other components, including some of the services in places like Indo-PACOM, it then becomes our responsibility to get them to the minimum viable standard for targeted advanced zero trust. So in some cases it's voluntary, and in some cases we're already doing it in those spaces, but we have partnerships in the voluntary spaces.
Manny, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Where are you and where is the State Department in your journey to zero trust implementation?
Yeah, so the State Department right now, it is the implementation is led by the CIO and the CISO for the State Department. So I'm in the Bureau of Diplomatic Security. So my role with Zero Trust is more on the cyber defense, the tactical side, which is the SOC operations. And we also help support the CIO and the CISO. Right now, given our global footprint everywhere, right? So right now there's a heavy focus on the identity pillar, and there's a heavy focus on the data pillar as well. So we're following CISO's implementation framework. And right now, our role is to support the CIO and the CISO along with the work that we do at the SOC to make sure that we collect data from endpoints and from the network and from the applications, analyze the data, right, and then visualize the data and then bring some automation as well.
Is the data that you're collecting different than before you undertook the specific zero trust journey? Are you collecting more of the same things that you were collecting before? What does that look like?
Well, we're always collecting a lot of data,
yeah.
For sure, right? And we are collecting more data, and what we're looking at right now is working to make sure that we're collecting the right data based on the new controls that are in place, right? But right now it's a bit sporadic just because we are a global footprint. So with some of the systems at our embassies or consulates may be different from what we have at the enterprise level, and then also as we work with cloud service providers.
Mark, welcome. Thanks for joining us as well. What does your zero trust journey look like at GAO right now?
So great question, as always. We actually have two different missions in this. First being, what are we looking at it from an operational sense? And then what are we seeing as part of our mission, which is monitoring how other agencies are implementing it. So let me answer both of those. The first one, we are well within our journey, or well into our journey implementing zero trust. I don't want to put a percentage on it, but we're almost there already. So it's great to see. We've mapped a lot of our systems across the board. We know exactly where we need to be, and now it's just in the final phases. Now, what we're also seeing as far as other agencies as part of our mission is that people are still challenged in whether they be mapping their data or going to those following steps. Certainly the identity pillars, knowing what's on your network, knowing who's on your network is well within grasp of many agencies, but now it's understanding all of those transactional portions of how data is being moved around. That is still the challenge as we move forward.
Since you're kind of more toward an end state that other agencies are aspiring to, what are some of the bumps in the road that you found, and how did you deal with those bumps when you got to them?
No, great question. It was a matter of just working with the various teams. Actually, this was more of at an application level and understanding all the different data mappings that are required to function. So what do the users need to do for the business applications? What do the systems need to do to understand what's talking with each other? Putting that all together really got us to the next level.
Ryan, how does what you've heard your government counterparts talking about comport with what we talked about in the first part of this program, and also what you see as you talk to clients, as you talk to customers or potential customers across the agencies?
Yeah, absolutely. So the identity and data pillar, right? We touched on that pretty significantly in the first section, and those are the main areas where a lot of agencies are starting or in the mid-journey within zero trust, within their focus. The mapping that you were talking about before, that is typically one of the harder ones to get through, just because data is everywhere, right? Yeah. Not only data that we're pulling into the SOC, right, but just data that we need to share and provide with different people within the organization. And it can be very difficult to be able to map that data within to know who should have access to what and when. The other thing that was also important is complying with IM 2131. So as we were talking about SOC data gathering and everything else, it is a regulation and requirement for all agencies, civilian, federal, DoD, to be able to capture and hold on to data for a certain amount of time. But it can be very expensive. Basically, nearly impossible to attain in certain cases, depending on the size of your organization, how many endpoints you have, users you have. So a lot of organizations are struggling, not struggling, but just trying to understand what is the important data to capture that's important to operationalize within an organization, because holding on to everything is just untenable.
That was something that you said, Manny, that jumped out at me, is making sure that you have the right data. How does an organization, and anybody can answer this, how does an organization know what's the right data for them to keep, and is the right data for Manny the same as the right data for some other organization? Is it different depending on the mission of the organization, size, or some other thing that I didn't think of?
I can start. So for us, I think it's important to look at the mission of the data, right? So in my case, right now, we support the Insider Threat Program. We also support investigations, because in diplomatic security, we have a law enforcement angle to the State Department, right? So we have investigations, and then we also have to meet the M2131 requirement, right? And then every data set has different retention policies. And then, right, so then what we're looking at doing within the SOC is making sure that we have a good data architecture in place with data retention, right? So that way we can lower the cost as much as we can by having cold, warm, or hot storage. And what we're doing right now is any storage that is going to be probably used in the future for investigations, then we move that into cold storage. But then the data, right, that we need on a day-to-day basis to do what we do in the SOC, right, for incident response or for cyber monitoring, then we look at what the data sets are, what the metadata that we need to be importing from each of the systems. Where it gets a little bit more challenging for us is because not every system is created equal, and there's a lot of legacy systems out there, right, even at the embassy level, that we have to also be able to ingest. On the M2131 requirement, that's where you have to be compliant, and then also good security, right? So right now we're working to ingest, right, the M2131 requirements to help our CISO, and it is expensive. Right, it is very expensive. We're not there yet. We're still on that journey, right? And what we're working right now is so that we can look at all the data and figure out what do we really need, so that we can do more of that operational cyber defense capability, right, and still be able to be compliant. Yeah.
No, I think that there's common threads with data, right? But there's also, this should be threat-based, right? So in other words, you're going to look for the data that draws the picture that you need to fight against the adversary, right? So I think common threads, NetFlow, data like that everyone's collecting across the board. But then as you bring in intel and threats, right, you might seek different data sources, then coalesce amongst each other to then alert and rectify, catch a malicious actor, right? So most of the data that I think we collect is based on the threat and the previous threats that we've had in the past.
What are some of the challenges that the other organizations across DoD that you interact with, Chris, are telling you about trying to get their data in the way that it should be for them to be able to make the progress that we're talking about here?
Yeah, so that's data format, right? So data's often a silo, right? So it's different types. There's structured and unstructured data. So how you look at that, how you collect that data, and how you make it work into certain systems, and a lot of systems are system specific. So really kind of middleware that gets you all to the same data place, a data dictionary that kind of defines the fields for what each piece of data does, and then what is the output or what is the outcome you get from using that data. But each service or each part of DoD and each system is going to have a different data format, which makes it very complicated to bring the data together and coalesce it the way you need it to have intelligence.
As I'm thinking about that, Mark, I'm thinking about you and your colleagues at GAO that interact with every part of every federal agency, Defense Department and civilian. And I can't imagine the complexity of that data flow, different formats and all of that you and your colleagues have to think about.
Yeah, we see all kinds.
Yeah.
Whether it be, thinking about it from the legacy perspective of, those type of systems to very modern AI systems, machine learning type infrastructure. But jumping back to what Manny was talking about different data sets, there's the whole gamut we have to be concerned with. It's not just what is happening at headquarters or field offices, but it's also now we have a much more mobile workforce. People that need to be out in the field, people that are on travel, people that are international. We have to worry about all these different data points, and that really varies the amount of data that we need to collect to make sure that zero trust is being adhered to. Not only not to mention the cybersecurity of any of those devices that are mobile.
What are the organizations, Ryan, that you're seeing that have a lot of success in getting their arms around the data question and being able to then move on to the next pillars? What are they doing well to be able to make that kind of progress?
Certainly. So I'll certainly point out a lot of the work that we're doing with Defense Information Systems Agency and the application of a defensive cyber operations or smart data pipeline, right? To basically capture the data that you need off of the zero trust infrastructure, but holding it where it is, right? We're all working in a multi-cloud environment, and it's expensive to move that data out, and we need to store it for certain amounts of time. And that can be expensive to be able to pull that all the way back to its central seam, handle it there, right? Leave the data where it is, bring the analytics out to the data, well, where it resides. You can help reduce that cost of data within that space, and then pull back just the analytics that you need. The other piece that revolves around data, it gets into what Chris was talking about as well as others, is the taxonomy, or how we tag our data, or how we manage our data within an environment. DoD has been having lots of conversations around what they call a zero trust data format, which is a common tagging infrastructure that we can use to then label our data, structured or unstructured. That gives us the ability to implement attribute-based access controls so that we can know who is asking for the data, what the sensitivity of that data is, and then make very quick millisecond response times decisions to then allow access to that data or not. So a lot of organizations are testing these out in different exercises that DoD is using. I know civilian federal is getting involved in there, as well as our IC community as well, looking at that taxonomy to normalize on a central approach.
Manny, as Ryan was talking about moving the analytics to the data, you were nodding very enthusiastically. What about that comment resonated? Why is that something that struck you?
That is exactly what we're doing right now for the SOC. So we're in the process of, we have already been working on this, but we're accelerating, right, our solution to a lake house approach, right? And also like leaving the data closest to where it resides, and then bringing the analytics to closest to it, right? Instead of actually moving the data, because the cost, like you said, it's very expensive. Yeah. The other thing that we're also looking into, and I am very great that he mentioned this, which is it's not the sexiest thing to do for a technologist, right? But it's extremely important, which goes back to a data dictionary, right? Data standards, right? The metadata, right? It's extremely important that it's going to be strategically aligned to like your mission, right? And it's going to be a huge impact, right, for the future of the operations. But it's not the sexiest thing to do for like an engineer, right, who wants to kind of get to that analytical AI capability right away, right? You need to have good data before you can do the analysis, before you can put machine learning on it and do the AI component. Yeah, so that's why I was nodding my head a lot.
Chris, you and Mark are both made references to data standards also, and the data exchange among agencies. What have you seen organizations do to do that well? And is that a matter of fixing the data connective tissue somehow, or is it asking organizations to change the way they send you data, or what does that look like, Chris?
I think it's both or all, right? So I think you need a governance piece to data, right? Then there's also systems and tools that you utilize to get to a common standard. So I think at least at DISA, we're trying to do both or all to get to a common data standard. And then where we can't get to a common data standard because of legacy applications or those type of things, we need, like I said, some middleware or something that transforms data to a common standard using a dictionary or policy. So we work within the parameters of what are set at DoD CIO from the standard for data from CDAO and other places. We also have an internal CDO that works through how we do data standards, and we also have champions in training for data. There's a lot of work we're putting into like citizen data stewards that work within the systems and places where they work, because they're going to bring the knowledge they need on the ground floor there. So we're doing all of those things, training systems and also governance in the data space.
Mark?
Yeah, as we're discussing RBAC and ABAC too, maybe this is an opportunity where we need to think differently, right? The traditional model is, with cybersecurity IT, we're leading the way in a lot of these type of things, but we have to remember our financial side always looked at this from an internal control perspective, really understanding data mapping and how it's being used. Our privacy side would always understand, okay, what is acceptable areas? Now, how can we put them all together to have one common place and body where we understand what roles need to be defined for what purpose, define what elements need to go to what people accordingly, so we can build this out together. It also streamlines a lot of the documentation that tends to rather be fragmented so that we can get into one central body of information.
You're in an enviable spot, I think, that you're farther along, it sounds like, or closer to the end of this part of your journey than I think a lot of organizations are. What are you thinking about what's over the horizon? I mean, there's no end point here, I imagine. I imagine that you and your colleagues are thinking about this like we're at the end of this part of the journey. How does this continue? What does this look like when you've implemented all the things that you want to implement and you then need to achieve a steady state?
Great question. It's really one of those hypothetical ones. We do have a whole innovation cybersecurity team that's really looking at those issues. But one of the kind of conceptual things we're looking at is maybe it's not RBAC, ABAC anymore. Now it's what is the data, how do we limit this data being sent out to a given place or a different given location? Maybe someone, from a location-based perspective, or, some of those more advanced techniques that we can do to limit that data in, mobile devices or other types of areas.
What are you encouraging people to do, Ryan, now to prepare for as they get farther along, as they kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel in these zero trust journeys, to be able to keep the momentum going and not just say, well, we've done it, so we can take a breath now? Certainly.
Part of that becomes looking at, and DoD does a fairly decent job as well, using their model. CISA, in a similar way, we have target state activities and we have advanced activities. That category that you were just talking about is in that advanced state. We also see that in the optimal state of the CISA models as well. Those are those areas of continuous improvement that we're going to continue to see. So a lot of organizations can look at those as aspiring areas to get towards. I find one particular area within that to be behavioral analysis. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of those cutting edge areas that a lot of folks aren't there yet. We need to map, we need to understand the data that we have, we need to understand the releasability of that data. But once we get that understood, now we can start tracking behavior and the movement of that data to get at the constant state of what's going wrong, what's going bump in the night based on what our baseline is for our users and our data within the organization. Thank you all for being here. There's a ton more I would like to cover and we're out of time, but I appreciate all of you joining me today. And thank you for watching Zero Trust In Depth, sponsored by Booz Allen. If you missed any part of this program, you can watch the show in its entirety at fedgovtoday.com or the FedGov Today YouTube channel. I'm Francis Rose. Thanks again for watching. Good night. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today.